And good morning. I'm glad all of you could virtually join us on Zoom for the St. Louis Regional Chamber's COVID-19 briefing with our bi-state chamber leaders. As our bi-state region continues to reopen, it's important to hear and address the needs from the business community to ensure we open safely and confidently. Before we begin, I'd like to take this moment to thank all of our healthcare and other essential workers who are still on the front lines during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Austin Walker, Vice President of Public Policy at the St. Louis Regional Chamber. Today, I'm very excited that we have Dan Mehan, President and CEO of the Missouri Chamber, and Todd Maisch, President and CEO of the Illinois Chamber, here to give a bi-state business update. I'd like to thank them both for their leadership, support for the region, and for taking the time to join our virtual meeting this morning. If you have a question you'd like answered by any of our speakers, please use the chat feature in Zoom, and we'll do our best to get to your inquiries. Closed captioning is also provided during these briefings, so please feel free to use that feature as well. Before we get started, I want to thank the St. Louis Regional Chamber's 2020 public policy sponsors. Their contributions support all of our public policy programming throughout the year. Now I'd like to introduce the President and CEO of the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dan Mehan, a longtime champion of the state's infrastructure, logistics, and workforce assets. Dan is focused on making Missouri the most competitive business climate in the United States. As the leader of the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, Dan was responsible for producing its 15-year strategic plan. Please welcome Mr. Dan Mehan. Sir, the floor is yours.
Austin, thanks so much. It's good to hear your voice, and it's a pleasure to be on this Zoom meeting. Thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from my colleague Todd Maisch across the river in Illinois. For Todd's benefit, I thought I'd just share with him a few things that happened in Missouri over the last year. A little Chiefs win. You can see a Blues jersey behind me. So I'd like to welcome Todd to the State of Champions. But that being said, jump right into the important discussion at hand. What are we doing to try to reopen the state, refire the state, and reimagine our economy across the state of Missouri, with St. Louis being an absolutely critical, the economic engine of the state of Missouri. We have somewhat of a decent news in that the May federal unemployment rate was at 13.3%. We don't have May unemployment rates for the state of Missouri yet, but in April we were at 9.7%. So we're below the national average in that measurement, and we're trending the right way. That's good news, and you're going to see a couple announcements coming out with the our Department of Labor as soon as today about what they're doing to try to brace for the reopening and to try to get a little more return to normal. I thought I'd go through and talk about a couple things in the legislative session. Austin, I know you all have had some of the legislative leaders from both sides of the aisle on your programs here, but just a few observations as we were going through the 2020 legislative session, and then we had everything shut down. And happened around spring break for the legislature, but when they came back for an abbreviated finish, we actually got some good things done. Punitive damage reform bill from Senator White, handled by Bruce DeGroat from St. Louis County, Senate Bill 591. Reciprocity of licensing for professionals coming into Missouri. David Grier from West County handled that. We also extended the broadband grant, which may not be that critical for St. Louis, but we just did a webinar at 10 o'clock giving scholarships to students on our Show Me Scholars program. 2 of the 6 kids could not get on from rural Missouri, and I think it's kind of indicative of the importance of broadband, and especially in the shutdown and what we've been going through in the pandemic, how important it is to be able to get online and get where you need to be. So that's important. We are looking ahead to hopefully a special session that the governor would call if he deems it appropriate. There's a couple things that would trigger that. One would be phase 4 of relief from the federal level, from Congress. If there was money, another tranche sent to the state for whatever purposes, the governor would call our General Assembly back in and hopefully decide how to appropriate the money. If that happens, we think we have a good shot at having added to that special session something that we've been hearing a lot about, and that's protections from liability during the COVID pandemic. When employers are trying to reopen, they're trying to re-envision how to reopen safely for their employees, for their customers. And there's a concern that opportunistic trial attorneys will try to trip them up, or that people will be looking for ways to expand lawsuits against employers who are opening up and may have an employee or some contact with the disease. We've seen other states move ahead in this regard: South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, to name a couple. When we put out a plea to our membership statewide and said, would you like to co-sign a very simple letter to the governor to ask him to consider this, we have 606 co-signers on it. That's way beyond what we expected for that. It really shows the traction that issue has and the fears that are being generated by it. That runs the gamut from large employers to very small employers, a pizzeria, a skateboard park, you name it. So one of the things that, as we move ahead, just some comments, we surveyed the membership roughly 2 months ago at the beginning of this, and what they expected to have happen. And just a survey of our members said they expected 15% of Missouri small businesses to close. Loss of revenue, permanent layoffs was at 17%. Businesses seeing a revenue increase was only at 14%. A decline was 68%. So the storm clouds were gathering, and that was coloring the day. That was, again, late March, early April. We think things have improved. We think we have some decent ideas on how to reimagine the economy in the state of Missouri. Things have changed. There's going to be a lot of jobs that just do not come back. Those will tend to be on the lower income level, 40,000 and under, which will impact younger minority populations significantly. And in this day and age, that's not a good thing. Obviously, it's never a good thing, but especially with the unrest that's been around the country. What we're looking to try to do is approach this as the overall economic recovery as minimizing risk, and our liability efforts go into that. But things like, how do you go back to daycare? Health safety is obviously mission critical. Occupational shifts where people, the new norm is working from home, and some of those jobs may not come in, and that doesn't necessarily have an income barrier to it. But are we going to be competitively positioned as a state? We have a great opportunity, I think, in the reshoring of the supply chain that we hear so much about. Missouri's in a unique position with its location to be the logistics and distribution hub for not just for the Midwest, but for the country and the continent, and that's worthy of investment. No one can take away our prowess in ag tech or the medical industry in general, special focus on biopharma. These need to be the focus points for looking into the future. We think we can use our cost advantage and our geopolitical uncoupling that's occurring from major metro areas significantly on the east and west coast. So luckily our economy is not dependent on energy. The states that are energy dependent are really getting hammered with the prices of energy that went so low for so long. We've seen a little bit of recovery, and we're not necessarily that big a back office state, because a lot of those jobs might stay at home now or could change for the future. So just a few observations to make on that. People can take a look at our recovery plan and how we're reimagining this for the state on our website, www.mochamber.com/recovery. Part of that is encouraging small businesses and large businesses to buy Missouri and make sure that we're trying to support those companies, those small businesses that are probably bearing the brunt of the difficulty these days. So Austin, again, it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to taking any comments, questions that might be out there as time allows. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. That was a fantastic update. And you mentioned, a number of policy priorities that, certainly our Public Policy Council endorsed. We're working on tort reform, HB 2046. That's that larger workforce bill, broadband expansion. We definitely care about that. And, certainly appreciate you guys also calling on the governor to do a special session. I believe you said around Wayfair and COVID liability for businesses. And, that's something we're hearing a lot about from our members as well. And the Missouri Chamber has also announced recently support for a proposal that would expand Medicaid to thousands more low-income adults. And I think that surprised a lot of people across the state, although it's not completely a new concept for the state chamber. Can you fill us in on where you're at?
Yeah, it's Amendment 2, which will be decided by the voters on August 4th, I believe. So 50 days away. What it seeks to do is expand Medicaid coverage for Missourians that are low income level. And the way we see it, it's getting more of the money that we pay in as a state to the federal government invested back into the state of Missouri, back into the healthcare system, which is 20% of our economy, a huge chunk of the economy, of jobs, of opportunities that are there. And much like the Federal Highway Trust Fund, we want to get our money back, but we also want to be able to take care of people that need it. And also, you look at what's gone on with COVID and the shutdown, a lot of those small businesses that had to lay off people, a lot of those people would fall into this category. Not to mention the fact that in rural Missouri, we've got a real problem in the difficulties that rural hospitals and healthcare providers are facing to remain financially viable to stay open and provide their services. So we had a position when this was under consideration by the legislature several years back, very similar, adopted same type of approach this year. And Amendment 2, right, Austin? It's Amendment 2 on August 4th. So we took a position in favor of that, and we announced that just last week.
That's fantastic. And, our Public Policy Council has been in support of the expansion. I know that the KC Chamber is as well. So that certainly shows a great deal of business support from across the state.
And Austin, if I could mention one more thing, I believe in the introduction, you mentioned Missouri 2030, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it. Our strategic plan that we created started at 5 years ago. At the time, Missouri was ranked 42nd in job creation, 43rd in state GDP growth, and 39th in per capita income growth. And that's hard data on a 10-year trend from the U.S. Department of Labor. So that was the backdrop. And we contracted with the Gallup organization to do a minimum of 1,000 interviews with CEOs across the state of Missouri. Kind of a SWOT analysis of how we're doing, what it's like to be in business in Missouri, strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. And the data was bulletproof, and it was very compelling to get this thing going. And at a time when we could point to very real successes in 4 major areas, workforce was number 1. And at the time it was, Dan, I've got the jobs, I can't find the talent to fill them. Competitiveness, our legal climate, our regulatory climate was causing people fits. Infrastructure was key, and it's roads and bridges, yes, but it's also ports, it's also broadband, it's a broad array of things. And then uniting the business community behind a common goal was the 4th. And our membership was excited about that. We were making very good progress with that. And then we have the pandemic hit. And we're looking around at each other saying, 2030, great vision, good progress so far. But if we don't get to 2021, we're not going to get to 2030. So the urgency right now to address those same issues, whether it's workforce, infrastructure, competitiveness, we have to do this now because other states are, and they are going, it's positioning the state for a strong recovery that is critical for our future. So we're calling it Missouri 2022 or 2021 now, but it is here and now, and it's imperative that we address these issues so we can have that strong recovery.
Thanks, Dan. And so the Missouri Chamber and the governor were in lockstep in getting businesses back open. So could you tell us what those conversations were like and maybe give us a little insight about, where things are going?
I'll do what I can. Obviously, number one rule, do no harm. So we need to stay safe. Employers never wanted to close, but they felt a responsibility to their employees and themselves to do that. And the governor obviously went that direction as well. I can tell you, not that I'm getting around the state nearly as much as I was, but I've been to St. Louis twice in 2 months, which is extremely rare, and it's very recently. And it's very different in St. Louis, my hometown, versus in Jefferson City or mid-Missouri. The state capital is in a county that has 57 cases and none active. I think none active, maybe 2. So it's just a different experience than what you see in an urban area. It's probably that way across the country. So the governor has the challenge of trying to say what's right for the state. And I think he's done a good job in saying, you know what, we're going to do some things that are recommended at the state level for safety, for precaution, but we're going to entrust those final decisions to, in your case, the city of St. Louis County, St. Charles County, or the collar counties. And I think that's the right approach. As I'm looking at the screen you all have up, I'm looking at the Capitol. We refer to it as the big house a lot. It's better for people in St. Louis to be making that decision than people in Jefferson City. It should be collaborative. And I do want to compliment the Department of Health, the Department of Labor, the Department of Economic Development. Obviously, nobody expected this to happen, but they've really worked their butts off to try to get this thing right as much as we could on completely new ground for everyone. So I think the governor's done a good job in trying to balance what's good for the state and letting the localities decide what's best for their community.
Yeah, I think, Dan, there's a fascination with state chamber work, certainly from folks that work at metro chambers, because of that balance. It's very interesting, and those are some tough decisions. And kind of getting into that, like, the civil unrest that you kind of mentioned earlier that swept the country and in Missouri, is the topic of conversation right now. Is the Missouri Chamber reviewing criminal justice, police, or any other kinds of equity reforms in Missouri?
I guess the best thing to say, Austin, is we're listening. We're not experts at policing policy, police reform. Our strengths, our lanes are economic vitality and hopefully creating that opportunity for all Missourians. And that's really where we're focused. Although you're right, it is the topic, or a hot topic of the day. And there's got to be a solution here somewhere. It can't go on and continue like this, just like we can't have employers fearful for opening up because there's anarchy in the streets. So it's a tough one for state lawmakers to address, especially with such a diverse state that we have, rural and urban and suburban. So, the best thing we can do is listen to what's going on in those communities that have encountered that and try to figure out a route to take if possible. That's pretty much where we are right now.
Sure. And, on the private side, private sector, do you think Missouri's in a position to build a more inclusive business community? Have you been hearing, any interest from your members around the state from being more inclusive about, the way that we do business?
I think in general, there's an awareness to do so. Has that changed? I'm not sure if it's been exacerbated by the events of the last couple months or not. But people are looking for ways to really follow the golden rule and try to treat people with respect, period. And that includes the employer community out there. I haven't heard much specifically about what employers are doing. I know there's an awful lot of HR manuals that already include that approach that are in play, ours included. So that while I guess the policy is in place, I guess the question more so is the practice being followed? And it's a bigger question than I know the answer for.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. I got time for about one more question, but it's kind of a big question. And you guys are better at this than just about anyone in the state about paying attention. What interesting races should we be paying attention to in Missouri? We got an election, several of them coming up. What are your thoughts?
Yes. Despite all the disruption from all the things going on these days, we're 50 days out from the primary election, and we've got a handful of races that we're looking at. You've got a couple Senate races in your neighborhoods that are going to be decided in August. We've got a couple down in southwest Missouri, southwestern and western Missouri, that will be decided in August. And so Senate 29, Senate 25 come to mind. We are going to be endorsing and playing aggressively in a handful of those in the primary. So David Cole is a candidate that we're supporting in southwest Missouri over Mike Moon. You all know we do ratings of votes and how much it's a batting average. Are you with us or against us? This guy, Mike Moon, had a 0 last year. You really have to work to get a 0, which brought his cumulative rating as a state rep down to a 5% of the time he was with us. He is a Republican. He was floating a blue shark, blow-up shark around the House floor in the last few days of session. I am not making this up. I can't make this up. I'm not that creative. And David Cole's just a solid, good thinker. We're going to play hard in that race. So that the integrity of the Senate is somewhat at stake here, and it will probably be decided by these primaries. You've got a hot Senate race coming in the general in the 15th. Incumbent Andrew Koenig and state rep, I'm blanking on her name, Kirkwood area, Deb Lavender. That's going to be very hotly contested. So one for you guys to watch in your backyard. So, and y'all have a hot one at the federal level with the second congressional. So all of a sudden, people are going to start turning their attention to the elections coming up, and that primary is sneaking up fairly quickly with all the other things going on. And but it's happening. We're trying to get back to our normal routine here as much as possible, so we can hopefully make sure we do the right thing out there politically, and also get ready for the next session coming up.
Well, completely agree. Those elections coming up are going to be really important, especially with everything going on, I think. And, really appreciate, Dan, you being here with us today, with our members, and for what you do for businesses at the state level.
Appreciate it, Austin. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Take care. And now joining us is the President and CEO of the Illinois Chamber, Todd Maisch, President and CEO of the Chamber since 2014. Todd leads a team of policy experts, business advocates, and communicators that impact the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of government. Todd's efforts have created a network of pro-business advocates, both on the state and national level. Sound tax and fiscal policy, reducing the regulatory burden on employers, proactive economic development, promoting innovation and greater investment in our critical infrastructure are all key priorities for Todd and the Illinois Chamber. Please welcome Mr. Todd Maisch. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Great to be here with everybody, and a lot to cover, and I want to make sure we've got some time for questions at the end, so I might talk a little bit fast, but there is, believe it or not, even the fact that we didn't have a full session, we had about 10 days of session, there are a lot of things going on out there. So let me go ahead and, like Dan, just go ahead and talk about the reopening issue. I will admit, for all of my friends on the Missouri side, I spent a wonderful weekend in Hannibal, Missouri, before Illinois reopened its businesses, because it was a reasonable thing to do. And I will tell you, I've not seen as much Illini gear in one place since I went to the last basketball game in Champaign. So we're unfortunately going to stop exporting all of our demand for bars and restaurants over to Missouri, but I hope you enjoyed it while you had it. But reopening, the Illinois Chamber really staked out a pretty aggressive approach, maybe the most aggressive that I've seen from a lot of other states, other than those that didn't have any kind of shutdown whatsoever. When the governor, Pritzker, first rolled out his plan, we said we're glad he has a plan, but we're just not this one. And it's still very problematic. It's way too slow, and it's also incredibly arbitrary, because the essential business concept included all sorts, thousands and thousands of businesses across the state, yet it also just arbitrarily literally shut down thousands of others. So the biggest example I've got for you is that if you were a family-owned garden shop, you had to be shuttered. If you were a recreational cannabis dispensary, you were essential. We said that doesn't make any sense. So our position from the get-go was that if big box stores and recreational marijuana stores can operate safely, we thought everybody that can comply with those same safety standards should be able to open. And unfortunately, I think we kind of, we're part of the push to get him to accelerate his reopening plan a little bit, but it's still really, really problematic. Even Andrew Cuomo in New York said, you know what, if we meet certain safety or public health standards, number of people in the hospital, the number of new diagnosed cases, testing, that we're going to go ahead and reevaluate every 14 days. In Illinois, unfortunately, the governor arbitrarily said 28 days. So that means that to get to phase 4 of his plan, we're going to have to wait until the end of June, while our friends across the river and frankly all of our surrounding states are getting more and more open, and we're still stuck with the folks that can put up tents in the tourism and or the restaurants and the bars are stuck with whatever they can go ahead and get in there. So we're just frustrated that the governor hasn't accelerated more. He came out just recently and said he's not going to speed up. But as we get closer and closer to phase 4, then I guess people's willingness to go ahead and I guess protest is going down a little bit. We did have the Glen Carbon Chamber actually file suit to go ahead and challenge the plan, the reopening plan. I don't think it's progressed very far, but every day we get closer to the broader reopening, again, you see a natural diminution of people's attention and saying, hey, it's going to get here eventually. Here's the big thing, though, is that, again, I think Illinois' governor has been unique in that he said, we're not going to go ahead and allow large gatherings beyond 50 people until there's a vaccination or some other kind of treatment that's proven. Well, that could mean that the Illinois convention industry, including Metro East, but especially in Chicago, McCormick Place and all those hotels, they're going to be dark barns until early 2021 at the earliest. And again, if you're a major trade show, you're planning out and scheduling your events a year ahead of time. So we may go ahead and not only lose 2020, we may lose 2021, even after there is a vaccine or some other kind of treatment that comes out. So that's phase 5 is still hugely important to the Illinois economy, the regional economy in the Metro East and your side of the river as well. So this is an incredibly important thing. We've really got to move him off of that phase 5 because you could lose all of 2021 in the hospitality, tourism, and convention industries if he doesn't go ahead and pull that back to a certain extent. So the reopening is really, really important. I will just say that for the Illinois Chamber's standpoint, there are a lot of things we could have done to respond to this. We certainly got guidelines out there, safety guidelines, but we really focused on small business liquidity, which was the huge issue. So we actually did partner with the administration, and he's got a really good Department of Commerce. Erin Guthrie's the director there, and she and I partnered with a series of webinars to kind of get through all of this myriad of plans that are out there to go ahead and help small businesses maintain liquidity and make sure that they didn't face the decision of whether to reopen or not. I think it was useful, but we really decided to go ahead and focus there, and that was our primary focus on the reopening there. So the other thing, we unfortunately, minimum wage, we advocated for a suspension of the July 1st increase in minimum wage. We're going to go up another 50 cents on July 1st. A lot of people made the case, the Restaurant Association, we did, the retail merchants who are across the street here, all of us said, hey, we've got businesses teetering on the brink, and you're going to go ahead and increase the minimum wage and expect them to bring everyone back and employ them. Illinois at its peak was 1.1 million people, new unemployment claims, and yet we're still going to go ahead and increase minimum wage 50 cents on July 1st. The governor, unfortunately, rejected that as a notion. We said, just delay it. We didn't like the increase to begin with. We said, delay it. That was rejected. So, so not beating up the governor too much, he really has shown a lot of leadership. He went out there and took control of a lot of things. And yes, Illinois' numbers have really come down, and I'm sure that the actions that he took were a big part of that. But I would say that we've had for a long time now 2 crises. The first was the public health crisis, but the second was the economic crisis that resulted in 1.1 million unemployed in Illinois. And there just wasn't the same focus on that, and we were concerned about that. But I will go ahead and say that unfortunately the third crisis is right around the corner, and I'm going to go ahead and dovetail off of Dan's comments, and that is the liability crisis. There is no doubt that it's coming. I think that the trial bar, especially in the Metro East area there, is pretty active. I think everybody knows that, but across the state, and I think that they are just lying in wait until enough of this gets by that they can go ahead and start doing all sorts of lawsuits. Yes, did you expose a customer or an employee to the disease? That's the broadest issue we've all got to worry about. Very, very concerning, but there are other concerns as well. Everything from securities lawsuits. Did you understate your exposure to COVID recession? To age discrimination. Did you happen to suggest that your older employees who were in that category of perhaps more susceptible, did you encourage them to stay home? And if that is the case, is that opening the door to an age discrimination case? So it's very, very broad, and that's just what we can come up with here in a few months. Trial bar, who is very, very dedicated, is going to come up with a whole lot of theories over the next few months, if not years. So the liability crisis is very, very real. So definitely, if you haven't sent an email, definitely sign on to Dan's letter, and I think I'm going to steal his idea, and we're going to go ahead and send our own letter. But call Mitch McConnell's office and tell him, insist on strong liability protections in any additional legislation that may or may not happen out in Washington. So support Mitch McConnell and his call for that. Let me go ahead and race through a couple of other issues though real quick. In terms of the election coming up here, we certainly, the legislative contests are always incredibly important. We've got a really important race, one of the top races in the nation. Our very, very good friend, of the business community, Rodney Davis, is in a really tough race. He's got all these college towns, and if they turn those out, that really kind of tilts against his likelihood, but he comes down to your area as well. Rodney Davis is a top priority on the congressional side. Legislative side, there's a few races. I won't get into all of them here. But the one thing we really are emphasizing is the progressive income tax constitutional amendment that is on the ballot. So everybody on the Illinois side is going to get an opportunity to vote yay or nay on whether we trash our current flat tax and replace it with a system that allows for a progressive tax. And I won't tell you all of the arguments against. I will tell you that on ilchamber.org, if you go to a special section of our website, we've got dedicated to that. You'll see a series of videos I've done that really start to make the case for opposition to that, and for a lot of different reasons. The one thing I'll go ahead and highlight here is that not only is that it will be the middle class that pays more taxes, not just the millionaires at some point. That's what happens in every other state that does this. The brackets always come down, and middle class taxpayers always end up paying more because there's not enough money in millionaires to fund the spending priorities of the folks over my shoulder here at the Illinois State House. The other thing is it does away with a prohibition that's very, very important that people don't talk about, and that is the prohibition on more than one tax based on income. Right now it's a flat tax, and there can be only one tax based on income. It does away with that one tax prohibition. So what does it allow you to do? Well, you know, maybe we're kind of peeved at realtors today. Let's go ahead and put a new tax on rental income. Let's go ahead and put a tax on financial transaction income. So what it allows you to do is go ahead and segment the business community and put new taxes on different segments of the industry, kind of, you know, separate somebody out from the herd, go ahead and put a tax on them, and then you're off to the races legislatively. So we wanted to go ahead and highlight that in a big way. Go to our website, ilchamber.org. We're working closely with the Farm Bureau on this program and others as well. So there's a coalition to join if you'd like to go ahead and talk to us about it. And then I will go ahead and also talk about energy legislation that is out there. This is primarily legislation driven by two forces. One is the environmental community that wants the entire energy segment to be carbon free by 2030. I think we've heard that. It's kind of in Democratic talking points. It's just not realistic. Just so you know, in Illinois, we currently have a goal of 25% use of renewables within, I think, just 3 years. We're currently at 8%. So if you go carbon free in just 9 years, we would say that that's not a realistic goal without some kind of major market disruptions. So that's one aspect of it. But the biggest driving force behind it is the desire for our major utility in Northern Illinois, Commonwealth Edison, and Exelon, its owner, to go ahead and bail out additional nuclear power plants. Now, we like nuclear power. That's great. That's fine. What we don't like is companies coming to Springfield and using the legislature to take money from everybody else and give it to them. So that's why we're opposed to it. And that's really its core. For Ameren, I don't know if anybody from Ameren is on, there is a priority item that is buried into that big comprehensive bill that we're actually supportive of. We've got legislation that's been introduced, and it includes that, it's called formula rate. If anybody wants to know more about it, but if anybody from Ameren is on board, is on the call, they're great members of ours, and we think that's a very reasonable policy. We would like to see it continued, but unfortunately it's buried in with all this other stuff that's in this Clean Energy Jobs Act. So we just bring that to your attention. Technology is the last thing I'll go ahead and talk about as well, because Illinois is unique from other states. There may have been a few states that have joined in, but Illinois is one of the few states that up until a couple of years ago actually regulated the use of biometric information. So we've got something called BIPA, Biometric Information Protection Act. And this might have been the biggest miss of my entire career, but back in 2008 when it passed, nobody knew that you'd be opening your cell phone with your fingerprint, or that when you got a season pass to Six Flags, they just use your thumbprint to go ahead and get in and out of the park. That is what's happened. And unfortunately, a cottage industry has stepped up or has been formed to go ahead and sue anyone that it doesn't subscribe to the letter of this Biometric Information Protection Act. I've had very sophisticated companies not even know that this law is on the books, but we're now up to about 400 to 500 different businesses, ranging everything from theme to hospitals to health clubs, all being sued for thousands and thousands of dollars because they weren't in compliance with this. You throw in the fact that some businesses are using facial recognition or facial scans to go ahead and take employees' temperatures as they return to work to make sure that they're healthy. That, if it's not protected the right way, boom, violation of BIPA, expect a lawsuit, thousands and thousands of dollars. So technology is huge issue going forward. The dirty secret is that it's not about privacy protection advocates, it's the trial bar who's driving 90% of this. So watch out for it. Dan, hopefully avoid this thing or get out ahead of it if you haven't seen it already. So I think I've got us at 11:48, and hopefully I left a little bit of time for us for questions. But thanks again for supporting your chambers of commerce. We do great work. We can't do it without you, and we very much appreciate your engagement and good feedback and resources that you provide all of us. So with that, I'll wrap.
Thank you, Todd. Great comprehensive report from the Illinois Chamber. One of the questions coming through is, one of the successes to come out of the Illinois special session was the workers' compensation bill that your team at the Illinois Chamber helped craft. How did you navigate the negotiation process, and what are some of the provisions that impact businesses and workers?
Well, and unfortunately, the workers' compensation bill was something that was, it could have been worse, type of situation. What we saw was that the Workers' Compensation Commission in Illinois put out a rulemaking that was frankly drafted by organized labor. And what it did was go ahead and say anyone who is deemed essential, essential worker at an essential business, if they get COVID or they can make any kind of case about it, then it's presumed that they got it at work, which means then it's automatically a workers' comp case. The Illinois system is notoriously expensive. But if you go back to when we started talking about reopening, the initial list of essential businesses the governor put out there was a double-edged sword. So it's almost, yes, you got to stay in business, you get to go ahead and keep your employees there if you were deemed essential, you didn't have to shut down, but it was almost like this workers' compensation rule was your price for staying in business and staying open. Because then all of your employees, so it didn't matter, we're not talking about just nurses and doctors at a hospital, we're talking about the person swiping your card at the gas station. If they would have had any type of interaction or had any symptoms of COVID, workers' compensation for their employer, didn't matter if they were hanging out at a street party over the weekend or any other dozens of possible places they could have gotten it. So the rule was rejected, and they came back, and it was slightly tighter and better. So it was a victory, and it could have been worse. I'm not sure I'm calling it a real victory. I think probably the biggest thing is that there's a time frame on it. It will sunset as long as when the governor takes off the emergency order. That's an awful lot of potential cases. So I appreciate you calling it a victory. My friends and manufacturers across the state were very involved as well. I got to spread the credit. But it was not a huge victory. It was defeating a defeat, I guess.
Sure, and I'm going to be respectful of time, but just have a couple more questions for you, Todd. There will most likely be a number of criminal justice, police, equity reform bills in the fall during veto session. Is the Illinois Chamber looking at any of these reforms, and what are you telling your businesses in the state during the civil unrest?
Yes, you know what, Dan and I talked about this yesterday, and the call immediately preceding this one was with my incoming chair and my current chair on this exact issue. And as a matter of fact, I guess we'll call it kind of social unrest. It's an overall issue. It's a dominant thing that's out there. I've got a board meeting on Thursday, so we want to make sure we organize the discussion and kind of focus in on what's going to happen. So I will tell you that I think that as I've talked to a lot of my veteran board members, they're in the category of, hey, this issue of policing may come up, but you know what? We don't know how to run police departments. Is that really our lane or not? Is that, what do we have to bring? Clearly, complying with the existing law and having the civil justice or criminal justice process work, we're all for that as citizens. So I think that we are going to stay away from the policing issue there because there would be voices that also say, you know what? The police that do the job the right way with the values that we all hold, they're protecting my business. They're protecting my home and my family. So I think there may be some of that discussion, but I think where my board's going to come down is they're going to say, you know what, we're about economic opportunity. We're really good at economic opportunity. We don't know how to run police departments. So I think that's where we're going to focus. And I think we're probably likely to hitch on to what the U.S. Chamber has launched. There's a big kickoff, I think, on the 25th or the 26th, Dan. And it's focused on economic opportunity. That's right in our wheelhouse. We've worked on ban the box issues. We worked on immigration issues. We worked on recidivism, getting people, once they leave jail, back into the productive workforce. So we've got a strong history of being involved in those issues, but making it our lead focus. It's really got to be economic opportunity and probably not, police reform.
So, Todd, last question. What do you think next session will look like for the Illinois Chamber?
Oh, God help us. We'll have to see. The biggest thing is going to be in taxation, I believe, and that may not even wait until 2021. We believe that our revenues are going to be down about $10 billion. We are one notch above junk status on our bonds, our GO bonds, if people didn't know that. And so you're going to end up with a really cheery conversation here. I can't believe that we haven't been downgraded to junk already because our budget is not even balanced, but even if you believe it's balanced, it relies on $5 billion of loans from the Federal Reserve. And the notion is that Mitch McConnell is going to sign off and Donald Trump are going to sign off on $4.5 billion gift to the state of Illinois to go ahead and pay off that borrowing. I can't believe we're not down in junk already. So if anybody pays taxes, you should be ready for the legislature to come for you. It could be everything from a financial services tax, service tax, income tax increase. We already talked about the progressive income tax. So progressive income tax takes care of about 20% of our real problem. So even with progressive income tax, everybody else is going to be paying more. So that is going to be the dominant issue, how legislature is going to look in every nook and cranny in the business community to find every dime they can. So pay attention and get out in front of it early if you've got a really important tax treatment that you need to preserve.
Todd, really appreciate that update. There's a lot there to unpack for our members, and we appreciate you being with us today on the call.
Great.
Dan, I want to give a shout out to you as well. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate both of you making the time today.
Thanks for the
Great to
opportunity.
be here.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody for joining today's COVID-19 briefing with our bi-state chamber leaders. As our region and our nation continues to reopen, the St. Louis Regional Chamber remains committed to serving as a resource, convener, and advocate for our members, investors, and community partners during these challenging times. And please join us for another business sustainability and recovery series on how nonprofits are adapting to change. And that Zoom meeting will be held this Thursday, June 18th at 10 a.m. Please see our website for more details. Thanks again for joining our virtual meeting today. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.